goes in the bedroom. He closes the door upon them. Okay, upon the dead son and himself. And he gets in the room, he closes the door, and he begins to pray. Here's what he says. Let's go to verse 34. And he went up and lay upon the child and put his mouth upon his mouth and his eyes upon his eyes and his hands upon his hands. Now, I don't know this. I haven't studied this out. I don't know. But he put his mouth upon the child's mouth. Okay, why would he do that? Well, he had quite a connection to God. And so his mouth on the child's mouth, Elijah would be able to breathe the breath of life right into that child. His eyes upon his eyes, so that the child could see what Elijah sees. And his hands upon his hands, so that he could do what Elijah does. And he stretched himself out upon the child, and the flesh of the child waxed warm. Look at 35. Then he returned and walked in the house to and fro, so that the child could go and do what Elijah does. And the child sneezed 7 times, and the child opened his eyes. Now, Elijah walks into the room, closes the door, gets alone with God, and begins to talk to God about what's going on in this child's life. Now, let me ask you, you told me at the beginning of this conversation it seemed like there was not one person in this room who didn't have a problem or an issue or a circumstance going on in their life. So let me ask you this. Why do we so resist getting in our prayer closet and bringing this before God if everything in our life, the fervent prayers of a righteous man availeth much? Well, you're a righteous woman, and you're a righteous man, and you're a righteous man, and you're a righteous woman. So why do we resist bringing things to God? Because if we do, maybe we'll have something that we need to do that God prescribes. And since humans are so wired to resist change, that if I bring them before God half the time, God might ask me to do something I don't really want to do. Well, I've got this big problem. My kid's dead in the bedroom, and I've got a problem because obviously God wants to do something about that. Now, what if Elisha just left the door open and, well, maybe I can get her to build another room. Instead of dealing with the problem and dealing with the issue and dealing with what's going on, Elijah just kind of walked away from it and hoped it went away. But things don't go away, do they? They just stick around. They just happen to stick around. But the fervent prayers of a righteous man availeth much. Do we believe it? Because if we believed it, we'd bring it to God. Wouldn't we? Okay, so let me ask you this. Why don't you bring your issue to God? Why don't you bring your problem or your situation or your issue before God? Well, God's not bigger than my problem, and he can't really deal with what I'm going through. Well, he created you. And if he created you, he can do anything he wants, anytime he wants. Like, if I created this bottle, I can make it bigger, I can make it smaller, I can make it bigger around, I can make it hold water, I can change the color of it, I can do whatever I want. I can take the ridges out, I can make it straight all the way, I can put more ridges, I can do anything I want. Well, God created you, and he's able to do anything in your life that you need him to. The problem is we don't really believe that. And so we stop short of bringing our problem or our issue or our thing before God. And we don't, not only that, but we don't always have the prescription right. Because we don't always really believe, well, Elisha did it, and it was okay back then, and it was good, and it all worked out. But, you don't know where I am, brother. You don't know what's going on in my life. You don't know what my issue is. Man, if you knew what my issue is, you wouldn't be saying that. Well, I know that God knows your issue. And if he knows your issue, he's just waiting for you to ask. He just wants you to come and to ask and to do what he says. And if we do, God is able to work through that situation and work through that problem and work through that issue to bless somebody else. Not just you, others. See, because this is not about you. It's not about you, and it's not about me. It's about the people I know and the people you know. That's the target. That's the thing, right? So if we'll do what God prescribes, the things that we desire through the prescription will come to pass. So now, let's keep going. Well, we kind of hit the road there. Then he returned and walked in the house to and fro, and he went up and stretched himself upon him, and the child sneezed 7 times and opened his eyes. And he called Gehazi, which was a servant, and said, call Shunammite. So he called her, and when she was come in to him, he said, take up thy son. And she went in and fell at his feet and bowed herself to the ground and took up her son and went out. Elijah brought the problem to God, closed the door, and when he prayed and believed that the fervent prayers of a righteous man availeth much, God, who cannot not do what his word says, did what he promised and brought life in a dark place. So let's use that in our life, and let's bring our problems and our issues and our worries and our fears and our uncertainties and our doubts before God. And if we tap into the Spirit in prayer, God's able to come right back into our life. Like when we pray to God, it's like if there was a computer that had to speak to somebody in China, here's my limited knowledge of computers. Nick's just standing there smiling because he knows I don't know much about this. But here's the deal. A beam would be sent from Earth to a satellite, and it would go from the satellite back to Earth. Now, if our prayer, for instance, to God is a beam to that satellite being God, then God is able to send a blessing right back down that beam and right into our life, if we'll do it. Okay, let's go back to Matthew chapter 6. Okay, let's go to verse 5. Now watch this. And when, notice again, it's not an option. It's not an option. Edification, exhortation, comfort is not an option. And look at that. Prayer is not an option either. God expects us to pray. The problem is, if I deal with that area, then I'm going to have to deal with this area, and I have to deal with this area and this area. I'm probably going to have to deal with that area. And man, it's too much work. It's just a lot of work to get my life straight and to get it figured out and undone to the point where God can begin to use me and move through me and bless people through me and deal with those issues in my life. Because it's like a water hose, and inside the water hose gets crud built up, and it gets harder and harder and harder for the water to get through there because of everything that's built up in there. Well, that water hose kind of sort of is like your life. As you go through life and as you go through things, those things are just get built up in there, and it gets harder and harder and harder and harder to get the blessing of God to flow back through that water hose and into our life. But notice in verse 5 that when you pray. So it's not an option. It's a requirement to get where we want to be. When you pray, you shall not be as the hypocrites are. Now think about that. For they love to pray standing in the synagogue. So what we're talking about church folk here. We're talking about people in church acting like the hypocrites, acting like the heathen. Well, I'm in church. How come how could he say that? I mean, why would he say it? Because think about it. There's a lot of people that talk a lot of stuff in the church and then never quite come through to the place where God can move in their life. Well, they stop just short of where they need to be. So when you pray, because when you pray, God's going to be able to use you in other people's lives. that you shall not be as the hypocrites, because again, they want to be seen and they want to be heard. However, they don't want to do. For they love to pray standing in the synagogues, in the church, and in corners of the streets. They want to be seen in the church, and they want to be seen in their life looking one way when really their life's a whole different way. That they may be seen of men. See, because they need to be seen a certain way. They just need to be. Verily I say unto you that their reward, that they have their reward. And what is their reward? Not much. Not much. Because the people that see them doing it aren't going to be the ones that bring the reward. God is. So we want God's reward, but we don't want to do what we have to do to get it. Okay. Look at verse 6. But thou, when thou prayest, that King James vernacular, enter into your closet. That's just exactly what Elisha did. Entered into the closet, in the place there was the problem, brought the problem before God, and God was able to deal with the problem through the prayer. So, shut the door and pray to your Father, not to people, but to your Father, which is in secret. That's what Elisha did. And thy Father, which sees in secret, shall reward thee openly. So how did Elijah deal with that? Well, he got into his prayer closet, so to speak, which was that bedroom where that dead child was, and he closed the door. So he got between the dead child and God, and he became a water hose, so to speak, from God to whatever was going on in his life, right, or their life, or her life, or the child's life right then. Pray to the Father which is in secret, and thy Father which sees in secret shall reward thee openly. See, because he got into that secret place with God, God was able to move through him and touch somebody else's life. But it's the problem is I have to get there. And, as we were talking about last week, well, what's wrong with prayer 5 minutes every day? Well, nothing's wrong with 5 minutes a day prayer. It just depends what you want in your life and how big it gets, because I can pray for 5 minutes and get this much of God, or I can pray for longer than that, and the more I rub shoulders with John, the more I'm going to know him, right? If I hang out with John every day for 5 minutes, it'll take 3 of those minutes to get in again with John, because I'm, every week I'm kind of walking out of the place I am with him, and then every week I have to reconnect with where we were last week. But if I extend that prayer time into the prescription that Jesus used with the disciples, he said, cannot you pray 1 hour? Well, if I pray with 1 hour, or I talk to John for an hour, I'm going to know him a lot better than I would if I talked to him for 5 minutes, right? Because it'll take 3 of those minutes to get through where we left off, and then we can hang out for 2 minutes, and then we can really connect for the next 55 minutes. You with me? And if I know that I have a problem and I don't take all the time I need to bring that problem before God, how long will it take God to be able to use or move in me or move in something else through me to take care of that need that I have if I refuse to get in his presence? Pretty quiet up here in this church, because that's something we don't really like to do. Well, how's your prayer life, brother? Well, I get it. Not very good. Well, I've been so busy, and I've been so, my life's so full, and I got so much going on. And so, I get it. But you also have a need, and you also have an issue, and you also have a situation. You have a problem that you want to take care of. It might almost be like a dead child in your life. It's been there that long. It's been that big a deal. It's a big deal in your life, and yet you're not taking the time to rub shoulders with who do you need to change that issue or problem in your life. Okay, let's keep going. Look at verse 7. But when you pray, there it is again, still not an option, still a requirement. Use not vain repetitions as the heathen do, for they think that they shall be heard for their much speaking. Okay, let's go to Proverbs 10 and verse 15. Problems. Man. Proverbs chapter 10 and verse 19. My King James Version says, in the multitude of words there wanteth not sin. An easier version says, where there is much speaking, sin is not absent. So if I have to talk to you and I talk 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 and I talk, what am I trying to do? I'm trying to keep you from speaking back. If I get in the prayer closet and I talk 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 and I talk, what am I trying to do? I'm trying to keep God from speaking to me. Because if I let him speak to me again, I might just have to hold on to my problem. But that's okay, because that's been there a long time. And I'd rather live in a known hell than a known heaven. So where there's much speaking, sin is not absent. But I'm using my words to cover up for what my problem is in life, or my lack of desire to really get that thing out of my life, because I talk and I talk and I talk and I talk and I talk, which keeps God from being able to talk back. Because if I'm talking to AJ